Well, welcome to an overview of the final section of the Book of Order, the Rules of Discipline. This is a section that is the most rarely used, but when it is used, it is often among the most significant, fragile, and difficult times in the life of a person or a congregation or a presbytery. And so as you read through this section, you will find both a number of principles that guide our work and some very detailed specifications in terms of timelines and process and procedure. I'm going to focus mainly on the broad issues of the purpose and some definition, and very little on the actual timelines because they are so complicated, and if you are in one of these processes, you will need to open this book up. And honestly, people involved in these processes are often working with an attorney who has skill in working in that kind of detail. Just some initial thoughts. First is that the rules of discipline are not just some things that we do in case people get in trouble. I think they're an outworking of our theology, particularly our theology of community, our care to do things in councils and groups to make sure that power is diffused, but also accessible to people, our care for people on the margins and people who might have been hurt by someone else. And so we provide care for that. It's also working out of our theology of sin, our recognition that both councils err and also individuals err in their personal and professional lives, and making processes for that to be dealt with in upfront and direct ways. And also, you will see that this is an outworking of our theology of sanctification, that we believe that God is at work in people's lives, and that even when people have done something that would be morally or professionally wrong, we want to create ways by which they can find health and wholeness themselves. And when councils err, we want them to get better and to learn and to move forward. You can see this already in our foundations section, where there is a value of ecclesiastical discipline that you'll notice is moral and spiritual in its object. It is not attended with any civil effects. It derives no force but from its own justice. This is our attempt to recognize the power of word and sacrament, and not to adhere to other forms of power in our world. Here is from the preamble of the Rules of Discipline, and I would commend to you a close reading of this. It is the place to which people go back time and time again as they are working through these things, particularly if they're on a permanent judicial commission or an investigating committee, and I will explain what both of those are. You'll notice that it is an exercise of authority. We recognize that the church has authority given by Christ. It's for guidance, and see, that's the first: control, nurture of its members, the direction of constructive criticism of offenders. It's not a substitute for a secular system. We try to do what a secular system, we believe, cannot do. To honor God, we make significant the membership in the body of Christ, preserve the purity of the body of Christ. And I'll let you read through that. I will note that at the very end, all participants are to be accorded procedural safeguards and due process, and it's the intention of these rules to provide those guidelines and help for people. Again, from the preamble, the power that Jesus Christ has vested in his church is one for building up the body of Christ, not for destroying it, for redeeming, not for punishing. Our goal is to help people. And this does not do away with the biblical obligation to conciliate, mediate, and adjust differences without strife. In other words, people are commended to talk directly with one another, that to use these rules of discipline is not to be the first step. We don't do this in a cavalier way. We want to try to find other avenues other than filing charges against one another, but we recognize that sometimes that is necessary. Let's just start with what's a PJC, because that's a term that's used importantly through this process. It's a permanent judicial commission, and permanent is the is an unoperative word there. It means that there's always one of these commissions. It does not mean that a person on this commission is on this commission always. You actually find the definition not in the rules of discipline, but in the form of government, because it defines all of what we do. And you'll notice the duties here: to consider and decide cases of process for the council or councils according to the rules of discipline. It can be the session. In a congregation, it can be the session, and every council higher than the session shall have a separate body that does that. There are times when the session can ask the presbytery to handle matters for it when it cannot. And then I would have you look at D5 for terms, in other words, how long people serve, which is a relatively long time compared to some of our other items in the Book of Order, and also for the way classes are done for the Permanent Judicial Commission. There are two types of judicial cases. There are these are the means by which church discipline is implemented for pastoral care and oversight, and it's to do two things: to prevent and correct irregularities and delinquencies, and those are called remedial cases. So that one type is a remedial case, and the other type is a disciplinary case, which has to do with persons. And I want you to note that remedial cases have to do with groups, and disciplinary cases have to do with individuals. A remedial case is an irregularity or delinquency of a session, presbytery, synod, or general assembly, or an entity of the General Assembly may be corrected by a higher council. An irregularity is a decision that someone, or an action that someone made that's wrong. In other words, someone did something that a person or a group believes that they should not have done. A delinquency is an omission or failure to act. A group, did not do what they were supposed to do. Two parties, a complainant and a respondent. So that's all technical language, but it's good to know as you think about a remedial case: irregularities, delinquencies, complainants, and respondents. Disciplinary cases are a case in which a church member or a person in ordered ministry may be censured for an offense. Ordered ministries, teaching elders, ruling elders, and deacons. And notice that those are all treated equivalently. An offense is an act or an omission by a member in ordered ministry that is contrary to the Scriptures or the Constitution of the Presbyterian Church. And I want you to note how broad that is, and I'll come back to that at the very end. But here is where an individual thinks another person has done something that he or she should not have done, or has not done something that they should have done, and then they file what's called an allegation against that person. Permanent judicial commissions in remedial cases consider the case, and there are forms that are filled out that give technical language about this, and then they have a couple of choices. They can issue a stay of enforcement. In other words, if a session says that it intends to change the time of a worship service, and a member of the church says they don't have that power, they could file a case, a remedial case, and then a permanent judicial commission on the presbytery level at this point could say, nope, you can't move that time because you're not allowed, you don't have that power, which of course a session does have that power, but that's an example of a stay of enforcement. It prevents a body from taking an action. And then a decision says that action was right, that action was wrong, you can proceed, you need to go back and reconsider it. If a body has moved to ordain somebody, that person hasn't been ordained, and there's a remedial case that says they didn't follow the process, then it can be remanded back to the, let's say, presbytery that was considering ordination to do it more fully, to do it again, to consider it again. If you look through the items about remedial cases, you will notice that there are timelines, always timelines, that keep things moving and also give space for people to respond. A permanent judicial commission in judicial cases has a number of choices. First, let me say, in a judicial case, an allegation is filed with the stated clerk. The stated clerk does not decide whether or not he or she thinks it's a good enough case. That person passes the case on immediately to an investigating committee. Investigating committees are chosen by a presbytery, synod, general assembly by a process that they need to define. And then that investigating committee investigates, and there's a number of responsibilities for that investigating committee. The Permanent Judicial Commission has a number of responsibilities. They can review, they can issue administrative leave if the allegation is of sexual abuse, and sexual abuse is a technical term in our rules of discipline that's defined. They can review an investigating committee decision. If the investigating committee decides not to file charges, then they can be asked to review that. They can work on what's called an alternative form of resolution, and again, that's a technical language where the investigating committee, not the accuser, but the investigating committee or the prosecuting committee and the individual accused come to an agreement. They can, of course, find not guilty, and if they find guilty, they have some choices in terms of level of censure. And again, that's technical language that you can find in the Book of Order. They can rebuke. They can rebuke with supervised rehabilitation. They can do a temporary exclusion, or they can remove. I like to say that the censure is rebuke is you've done something wrong. Rebuke with supervised rehabilitation is you've done something wrong and you need to do something about it. Temporary exclusion says you can't do what you've been doing until you do something about it. Often that comes with supervised rehabilitation, almost always. And of course, you can be removed. But even if you're removed, I would invite you to go look at that section and see that there's still kind of this desire, this hope that a path forward would even be found then. Running a trial in a PJC, I just want you to see that it requires neutrality, that the location is considered, that there's timelines, that there's procedures, that there's paperwork. So there's a lot of detail in the rules of discipline about how we do those kinds of processes so that they are fair and open and everyone knows what's going on. There also, in the Book of Order, is called a request for vindication, which, and this is directly from the Book of Order, if a member, and that can include a teaching elder, feels injured by rumors or gossip, they may request an inquiry for vindication by submitting to the clerk of session or the stated clerk a clear narrative and statement of alleged facts. And then an investigating committee is appointed, and the procedure goes from there. I've seen this done by a teaching elder who thought that there were people who were spreading rumors about him in this case, and so he asked for a request for vindication. The investigation happened, and it was granted. And so there was a public declaration that he had in this case not done something that people were saying that he had done. And it's a way in our polity to have for a person to request that something be dealt with publicly. Some final thoughts. Just so you know, there's a revision of this section ongoing. And I just the other day received an email asking me for thoughts. Not all stated clerks got it for thoughts. There are complications in particularly a disciplinary case for allegations of sexual abuse, and the recent increased awareness around the damage done by sexual abuse has made working with this section complicated, both in legal cases but also in our own sense. And the timelines and also the processes for putting somebody on leave have all changed, and I think that'll continue to be a conversation. You will note in here, and this is back to the beginning, the necessity for forbearance, and I might say direct accountability for people. These rules are open, I mean, in a sense, for abuse. In other words, somebody could sit down and file allegations all the time, and they need to be dealt with. There's no kind of instant mechanism for someone to say, no, that's ridiculous. So just note that and be aware of it. The role of the stated clerk in this is a process person. We try to maintain fairness in all of this. And then I will note that I think one of the main things for the rules of discipline is a holding environment for trust, so that there's a space for people to trust their leaders, both individually and corporately, and know that there are systems of direct and solid accountability on a personal, moral level, but also on a professional decision level. And the rules of discipline work to provide this. When I do new member orientation, I talk about the rules of discipline. I don't go over it like we would here, but I make people aware that we're serious about a holding environment for trust, for people to develop healthy relationships between leaders and followers. And I think that's the goal of the rules of discipline, as well as care for anyone individually or corporately who has strayed, gone intentionally, is outside the bounds in terms of our decision making or their personal moral choices.